Hi everyone. So disclaimer number one, I'm first and foremost a React developer, and if you asked me 1 year ago, like, what's my opinion on Angular, I would say like, pfft. Disclaimer number two, since this is an Angular talk, please do not walk away. And right, so let me start with a question. How many of you did actually touch Angular at any point in your career? Like, please raise your hands up. Yeah, pretty much the whole room. And second question, would you say that it was quite a long time ago? Let's define long time, like more than 1 year. Was that more than 1 year ago? All right. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop the questions here. I'm not gonna ask you what are your impressions about the framework, but I would like to share my learnings. I got interested in Angular in 2016. Then I thought well, maybe this is not the best framework I'm interested in. But just a couple of months ago, I lost my kind of interest in React due to many things that happened around there. And I was thinking what is going on around other frameworks? And I saw there are so many changes that happened in recent year or year and a half that I didn't imagine that actually there are so many groundbreaking changes I would like to share with you. I hope you will give the framework a chance again. So my name is Tomasz and I'm running a one-man consultancy company. So I help teams in different companies to overcome issues related to architecture, performance, testing, getting things done faster, so on and so forth. I do trainings on JavaScript, TypeScript, React, Angular, blah, blah, blah. You might be wondering how could you be proficient in two completely different frameworks? And the trick is I'm trying to follow Microsoft's rule, and that is meet developers where they are. And these two frameworks basically seem to be the most widely used in industry. So basically, this is what I'm trying to be proficient with. If you want to reach out, feel free to write me at ducin.dev. So fun thing about me is being a former React developer, I got interested in Angular, and I found both the community and the people, the tool, etc., to be so kind of nice and optimistic that I quickly became a contributor to Angular core dev tools, and I found it really, really, really awesome and interesting. So let's start with round one, and that is signal. So if you have ever tried using Angular, most probably you have stepped upon React.js observables. So React.js is a pretty complex, I would say, library that is capable of representing pretty much everything as an observable that could emit events and represent values, represent time, represent data, represent pretty much everything that moves in the world. And for this reason, it's so universal that it contains over 100 operators, and that is not the worst part. When you need to learn observables in this paradigm, you need to know what are higher order observables, what is unicasting, what is multicasting, how do you share subscriptions, how do you care about subscriptions, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And actually, one of the biggest pain points when walking into Angular is that actually this is so damn complex. This is universal, right? But if you want to get things done, you have a very, very high learning point when you want to get into the tool. Apart from that, there is a whole, mental model that you need to get your head around, and it takes really years to understand it very well. And there are people who didn't get to that point yet, and there are people who are there. And well, I think I understand the concept quite well, but the truth is most applications are not rocket science and not quantum physics. We do not need an abstraction that is so, overcomplicated, kind of. We could basically replace it with something simpler. So what Angular has introduced in recent versions is what you probably know from solid.js, and that's basically signals. So what we're doing is we're replacing this whole complex thing with lots of operators, lots of difficult topics with basically 6 functions. So we create a signal that is basically a wrapper around the value. We can change it by either replacing or modifying the value. We can make it a read-only so that, encapsulation, blah, 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 nobody could write it from the outside. We can make a computed value, just like a use memo in React, or we can make any side effect depending on whether the effect changed. And there is no subscription, there is no unsubscribe needed whatsoever, and there are no dependency arrays like in use memo, use callback, use effect. There are no linter rules like React hooks, exhaustive depths, and hundreds of questions on Stack Overflow and tens of blog posts about whether you should ESLint disable or not. There is basically no point in doing that. If we can see that if a certain computed value basically reads a signal, then we can make, the framework can make it aware that there is a dependency. And it can track dependencies, not only statically, but also dynamically. So if I have, let's say, a conditional logic that first I depend on some signal, but after my condition changes and I start depending on something else, that's all reflected within that. And as a consequence, the whole entry level becomes way, way, way smaller. So eventually, React.js is going to become optional entirely, and I truly believe most of applications are not going to use React.js that much. Basically, Angular is becoming simpler. So, round 2, deferrable views. That's actually one of the things that I consider the best usage of the compiler. Because we all know that React is not a framework, it's a library, and so on and so forth. And Angular is a fully fledged, battery included framework, etc. It has a very complex and sophisticated compiler. So what deferrables views are? Imagine you have a view, and basically you put a add defer block and write curly braces. And everything that is basically inside of these are going to be moved away into a lazy chunk. And that's all you do. That's basically it. You do nothing else that basically starts working. So this component might have child components. Those components could have Angular-specific stuff like pipes or directives, never mind. But basically, entire abstract syntax trees and all the dependencies of their dependencies, etc., they're basically going to be moved away into a separate chunk. So a defer block could include a trigger, so basically saying when should something get loaded. By the time that it's not loaded yet, you could optionally put a placeholder, additionally defining any conditions like what are the rules to put a placeholder or not, loading, spinner, or an error, whatever you really prefer. So at this point, you could say, this is kind of like Angular is catching up with what React had, and kind of, yeah, true. In React, we would have to import lazy suspense. We would have to wrap the component with a dynamic import, etc., etc. We would have to put the component and wrap it with a suspense, you know, all the drill. And the difference here is that in React, when is the moment when a lazy component actually gets fetched from the server? That is basically whenever the component would be when React would try to actually display it, to render it. So this is so in the most lazy fashion. Now, if you wanted to change it, to override it, this is doable, but you would need to write imperative events to handle that. Let's say, if you just hover on something or click on something, that you would need to actually run your dynamic import to actually fetch the file, so that later, when actually the interaction takes place, the file is already within the browser. So where I would say Angular is even ahead of React is a small syntax that basically makes it way simpler. So we have triggers that is on idle. So basically whenever the browser is idle, is not doing anything important, start fetching the thing. On immediate, so like immediately. On interaction, that's basically when the user clicks something, try to load something. Of course, not when the user wants to walk into a tab that you don't have, but when the user clicks something before, so that when the user wants to actually walk into a tab, it's already there. Or on hover, on viewport, on timer, etc., etc. And if you want to have any custom condition, you can just write when condition. And that's basically it. All the point is that you just put a single line, and you can break a whole application into smaller chunks. So in big scale applications, the difference is that if you wanted to, let's say, break React into smaller, lazy chunks, there is actually a lot of places that you would need to track, right? This is, of course, doable. But here, thanks to the fact that it's basically a one-liner and you don't need to do anything else, basically, you get your things done faster. So that's deferrable views. Just a quick demo time. So what we've got here, dear everybody, is a couple of examples, and what we've got on the right-hand side is basically the network tab. So for instance, in idle, lots of chunks could have been loaded by the time. On viewport, here I have a scroll over here, so once something will become visible in the viewport, a chunk is loaded, and so on and so forth. On hover, basically, when I hover, things get loaded, etc. And these all are basically simple one-liners. So, round 3, functional APIs. One of the most important things in designing applications is basically where to put the logic in so that it doesn't become a mess and spaghetti over time. So what we've had before was constructor-based injection. And as we know from React world, well, classes are not that flexible, and some people are kind of surprised that Angular is still stuck in classes. Not that much, not anymore. The thing is, class-based injection has been replaced with functional APIs, which make it way more, let's say, flexible. Basically, we're going through the same route that we've been going with React transitioning from class components into hooks. So, if we wanted to inject something, now we inject it through a functional API. What we receive, thanks to it, is that we can basically start writing a function that injects whatever the thing is. Now, does it remind you of something from React world? Right? That's basically use context, right? So we can put parameters, parameterize the stuff. We can, make the service, like the service could be stateful, but we could, inject additional logic, inject additional parameters. Moreover, there is also a thing called destroy ref. Basically, destroy ref invokes its callback, which is defined here on destroy one. Whenever any piece of the view could be destroyed or any part of the application could be destroyed. So basically, we provide a function that this injects something that is going to set up what we want, get our dependencies, do the cleanup, and do all the stuff, and basically, dear everybody, load it within just one simple function. Or if we wanted to compose our logic and our injectors, we can provide an inject something, inject else, the same way as we go with use context. Inject something, inject else, combine it into a like higher level logic thing, whatever that is, and go on with inject something else. So there is no requirement to use classes at this point, and there are also experiments to provide function components, which we're going to have probably in the future. So the topic that is the most interesting, actually, is Angular becoming zoneless. So there is a thing that is called Zone.js, which initially people thought is a good idea. And as you can see, the time, like we see from the time's perspective, that some of the ideas were actually not the best ones, and actually Angular is getting rid of the bad decisions. So if you want to like quickly introduce what is Zone.js, let's go back in time to the old Angular.js, the one that was introduced in 2009. So let's say that we have a hierarchy of components in our applications. So whenever something changed in old Angular.js, the framework had to basically traverse through whole tree of all the components within the whole application. So that doesn't look good. Additionally, if there was a service that was sharing some data across the whole application, the thing is, if the last component has changed something within the service and some other components who have been previously traversed depend on the service, the problem is we would have to go through the whole traversal once again. And if it happened again, we would have to go through it once again and again and again, and it's called digest cycle. So it's maybe not the best piece of engineering that you can think about, Angular, the new Angular 2+, has replaced digest cycle with what is called Zone.js. So whenever there is an interaction, and actually all interactions are async APIs, so a user event, data coming, incoming, being received from a server, and I don't know, time passing through timers, intervals, whatever that is. These are all async APIs. So what Zone.js is doing is it's wrapping all async APIs, and whenever any consequence of an async call, like a promise, an observable, HTTP response being received, events, etc., whenever such thing happen, Zone will notify, this is what current Angular has. Whenever Zone.js finds out that there is a async call, it will notify the whole application, and the whole application will traverse all the components again, but it will do it one time. Now, this is not as bad as it was with Angular.js, because here components are being marked as dirty. So even though we do traverse the entire application, but we don't refresh all the components. So this is a concept that doesn't exist in React, like component being dirty. There is no such thing in React. So even though you could traverse the whole application, you might basically update only one component. So when we compare, so we're going towards the zoneless one. So when we compare performance of Angular and React, the advantage of Angular is that it's using incremental DOM, which basically means it doesn't have to produce all the virtual DOM in the runtime, etc. Virtual DOM is basically an approach where we know what the view is, so the compiler is going to, like in Svelte, the compiler is going to generate very small and simple functions to show very simple functions like create a div, append an attribute to the div, append a text, close the div, open a new tag, append attributes, etc., etc. And this function is basically put into the bundle. The thing is, we avoid the entire virtual DOM creation thing. But the downside of Angular is that we are doing the tree traversal, which is completely unneeded. Now, the pro of React is that if there is a change in any of the components, changes never go up, right? And there is no such thing as a service that other pieces of the application could depend on. Even if we have a context, the data always flow down. Right? So even if a good practice in React is basically to put the state as deep as possible, because the smallest subtree will basically get updated. Now, what Angular is trying to do right now, and it's been announced that this will be achieved this year, is to get rid of this concept, to be more performant. So when we're going zoneless, and there is already some work being started here. Let's say we have a component that has a signal. Now, we mentioned that signals and their derivatives are aware who is using them, who is tracking them, who depends on them. So if we have a template that is going to basically read the value of a signal, So the template becomes an active consumer of the signal, and combining, joining it with the fact that we have incremental DOM, so the very small functions that would basically take the P tag or even take the text node and basically replace it. So we are able, Angular is able already to implement a feature that not only we would be able to update only this single component, completely ignoring the rest of the application, but we could update only this single text node. This is perfectly doable, and there is no, it's not that complex to achieve. So all in all, what I'm expecting, and this is going to be released this year. So what I'm expecting is once this is shipped, Angular's runtime could be faster than React because of incremental DOM and because of targeting the exact super atomic changes that are required to be put here. So I hope you will give Angular a try. Maybe I didn't convince you to start applications, but at least you would take give Angular a try to see how do these features work. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.